The nurse was still adjusting my IV when my phone buzzed on the bed rail and I saw it was my mother calling me back. I had called her 40 minutes earlier, from the floor of my bathroom, which is where I had been when the pain got bad enough that I stopped being able to pretend it wasn't happening. "Mom," I said. My voice came out strange, thin and a little far away, like it belonged to someone else. She said, "I was just about to call you. Your brother is here and things have gotten a little complicated. Can I call you back in 10 minutes? "I'm being taken to St. Catherine's," I said, "by ambulance. I think something is wrong with the baby." There was a pause. Then I heard my brother's voice in the background. Not the words, just the tone, the particular pitch he uses when he wants to be the loudest thing in any room. My mother said something to him I couldn't make out. Then she came back. "Oh, sweetheart, how far along are you again?" 14 weeks, I said. Okay, let us know what they say." "Mom, I need someone there." "Ethan is 3 hours away at his parents' place. He's already driving back, but I don't know how long I'll be, and I'm by myself right now, and I'm scared." Another pause. My brother's voice again. Then, softer, my mother said, "Megan is having kind of a situation right now. I'll explain later. You know how she gets. Just try not to stress, okay? Stress is bad for the baby." The paramedic looked at me from across the gurney. I turned my face toward the window of the ambulance and watched the streetlights start. "I'm 32 years old. I'm an occupational therapist at a rehab center in Columbus, Ohio, which is not the most glamorous thing to say at a dinner party, but it is work I believe in most days, and some days I believe in it a lot. I've been with my husband Ethan for 6 years, married for 2 of them. He is a project manager for a civil engineering firm, which means he spends a significant portion of his life on spreadsheets and phone calls about drainage systems, and he is the most reliably present person I have ever known. Before I tell you what happened at the hospital, I should tell you about my family. Because otherwise, the rest of this won't make sense, or it will make the particular kind of sense that lands in your chest like something you already knew. My parents live about 40 minutes from us. My mother is warm and funny and has always had a soft spot for my younger sister Megan that she has never quite tried to hide. Megan is 28. She has a theater degree she doesn't use, a rotating series of creative pursuits she cycles through every few months, and a talent for arriving at emotional conclusions before the facts have had a chance to catch up. My parents have bailed her out financially more times than I have counted, which I stopped counting because the number was making me feel something I didn't want to feel. I left home at 18 on a partial scholarship. I paid my own way through school. I got my master's degree at 24 while working 30 hours a week. I bought my own car. I moved into my own apartment. I married Ethan at a small ceremony in a botanical garden in September, and we paid for the whole thing ourselves because I knew what asking for help would eventually cost. What I had not stopped, though, was the other thing, the quiet thing that started 3 years ago when my father's hours got cut at work and they were short for their mortgage payment. Just that 1 month, I told myself. Just until things stabilized. But things have a way of not stabilizing, and I have a way of not saying no to my parents, and so it kept going. 200 here, 300 there. Once, $800 when Megan needed a security deposit and my parents needed a car repair, and somehow both of those became my phone call to deal with. Ethan knew. He never told me to stop. He did ask me once on a Sunday morning over coffee if my parents understood how consistent the amounts had gotten. I said I didn't think they thought about it that way. He nodded and looked out the window at the neighbor's yard and didn't push it. Ethan is good at not pushing things before they're ready. I'm still learning whether that's a gift or a warning. I was admitted to St. Catherine's at 9:17 on a Wednesday night in October. The ER doctor ordered an ultrasound within the first 15 minutes because of the cramping and what I had described to the paramedics. The kind of pain that had a color to it, if that makes sense. Not just discomfort, but something insistent and bright and wrong. I lay in the exam bay with the curtain half pulled and stared at the acoustic tile ceiling and tried to breathe the way I'd read about in the prenatal book I'd bought 6 weeks earlier and hadn't told anyone about yet because Ethan and I had decided to wait until the second trimester to share the news. Ethan called at 9:45. His voice was tight in the careful way it gets when he is frightened and does not want to show me how frightened he is. I'm 2 hours out, he said, maybe less. What are they saying? They don't know yet, I said. They're getting the ultrasound set up. I'm coming as fast as I'm legally able to, he said. There was something about that, the specifically Ethan quality of saying legally, even now, that made me almost smile. Are your parents there? He asked. Not yet. He didn't say anything else about it, just told me he loved me and that he would call when he was closer. At 10:15, I called my mother again. She picked up on the second ring. How are you doing, honey? They found something on the ultrasound, I said. The doctor wants to talk to family. Can you come? I heard her exhale. Your sister is still here. She's in kind of a bad place tonight. She had this audition that she'd been preparing for and it fell through and she's taking it pretty hard. Your father and I don't really want to leave her alone right now. Mom, I'm in the ER. I might be losing the baby. Silence. Then, oh honey, I'm sure it's going to be fine. You've always been so strong. I have a hairline fracture, I almost said. Except that wasn't true. That was a different story. What I actually said was, I need someone here. We'll come as soon as we can, she said. Just as soon as Megan settles down. I put the phone on the bed beside me and looked at the curtain. My friend and coworker Adrian arrived at 10:40. I hadn't called her. Ethan had from his car somewhere on I-71 because Ethan thinks about things like that even when he's scared. She came through the ER entrance with a canvas bag over one shoulder, and when she pushed past the curtain and saw me, she crossed the room without a word and sat in the chair beside my bed and took my hand. Adrian has been my friend for 4 years. We met during a particularly brutal stretch of back-to-back ICU patient transfers and bonded over the shared experience of eating gas station sandwiches in a supply closet because neither of us had taken a real lunch break. She is practical and irreverent, and she brought me a warm blanket from the nurse's station without my having to ask, and did not once make me feel like an inconvenience, which, as I said before, is rarer than it should be. At 11:20, the doctor came back and sat across from me in that careful way doctors sit when the news is not catastrophic, but it is also not nothing. The pregnancy was what they call a subchorionic hemorrhage. Not uncommon, not automatically dangerous, but serious enough to require monitoring and rest and a follow-up with my OB in the morning. The pregnancy was still viable, there was still a heartbeat, but the next 48 hours were going to tell them a lot more than they knew now. Is your husband coming? She asked. He's about an hour out, I said. Good, she said. And family? I looked at Adrian. My husband is coming, I said. She wrote something in the chart and told me to rest, and I tried to. My parents arrived at 12:54 in the morning, nearly 3.5 hours after I had called the first time from the ambulance. My mother came to my bedside immediately, touching my face, looking at the monitor, doing the performance of concern that I have spent 32 years trying to read correctly. My father stood at the foot of the bed and looked, not at me, but past me, at Adrian, who was still in the chair with my phone charger in her hand, having just plugged it in for the third time that night. Who is this? He said. She's my friend, I said. She's been here since 10:40. My father looked at her with an expression I know very well, the expression that means he is recalibrating something. My mother said, oh, she didn't have to do that. She didn't have to, I said. She wanted to. My father looked at Adrian the way people look at someone who has arrived somewhere before them and made them feel the lateness of their own arrival. Then he said, well, we're here now. Adrian looked at him. Then she looked at me. I shook my head slightly. I'll wait outside, she said. She stood up and picked up her bag, and she looked at my father with an expression of absolute composure. Take care of her, she said. And she went. My mother sat where Adrian had been sitting and held my hand and asked me twice about whether I had been eating enough vegetables during the pregnancy, and once whether Ethan had updated the beneficiary on his life insurance since we'd gotten married. My father sat in the corner and looked at his phone. I stared at the ceiling. I want to be honest about what I was feeling in that room because I think people sometimes skip past the part where they describe it. I wasn't angry exactly. Anger requires a kind of surprise, and I had not been surprised. I was something more like tired. The very specific tiredness of someone who has been waiting for a long time for something that never quite arrives, who finally, in the small hours of a Wednesday night in a hospital gown with a monitor counting the heartbeat of a baby she hadn't told them about yet, understood that it was never going to arrive. Not because they were cruel, because this was just the shape of it. This was just how the math always came out. Ethan walked through the curtain at 1:47. He looked exactly like someone who had driven 3 hours without stopping. His jacket was still on, his tie was in his pocket, there was a coffee cup in his hand that was clearly cold because he had forgotten about it somewhere around Dayton. When he saw me, he set the cup down on the tray table without looking at it and came straight to the bed and took my face in both hands and looked at me for a moment that was long enough to say everything without saying anything. Then he looked at my parents. He said, "Good, you made it." My father said, "We got here as fast as we could." Ethan said, "Sure." And then he sat beside me and took my hand, and the room rearranged itself around that gesture in a way I can't fully explain. Later, after my parents had gone down to the cafeteria to find coffee, Ethan sat with his thumb moving slowly across my knuckles and said, quietly, "How long after you called the first time?" 3 hours and 37 minutes, I said. He nodded. Then he said, "What was it? What was so important?" Megan had an audition to fall through. He was quiet for a moment. "Which audition?" "I don't know," I said. "I didn't ask." He looked at the curtain. Then he looked back at me. He said carefully, "In the last year, how much have we sent?" I knew the number. I had always known the number. "Just over 5,400, I said. He nodded once, slowly, the way he nods when he is not surprised but is letting himself catch up with a fact he has been waiting to look at directly. "Okay," he said. That okay. I have thought about it many times since. It was not resignation. It was not anger. It was something more like a lock turning, quiet and final, in a door that had been loose for a long time. The subchorionic hemorrhage resolved. That is the clinical word, resolved. By my follow-up appointment 2 days later, the bleeding had reduced significantly. My OB was cautiously optimistic. She used the phrase progressing normally, and I felt something in me unclench that I had not realized was clenched. By 12 weeks later, I was buying a crib from a woman in Westerville who needed to clear space in her garage, and Ethan was arguing with me, very gently, about whether moss green or soft gray would look better on the nursery walls. I did not tell my parents about the pregnancy during any of that, not because I was punishing them or not entirely, because I needed to hold something for a little while that was just mine and Ethan's before it became a thing my family had an opinion about. My mother called twice the week after the hospital, once to check in, once to tell me that Megan had gotten a call back for a different audition, a community theater production in Worthington, and that she was feeling much better, as though this were news I had been waiting for. I said, "That's great." I said it flatly and without decoration, and I think she heard something in the flat of it because she paused before saying goodbye. What I had decided quietly, between the hospital and that phone call, was that I was going to stop the transfers. I had told Ethan on the Sunday after I came home. We sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and went through every payment, every Venmo, every time I had absorbed something without naming it, and the total sat there between us on the yellow paper like a fact that had been waiting for a long time to be looked at in the light. I wasn't ready to tell my parents yet. I wanted to wait for the right moment, which I have come to understand is what people say when they're still gathering the nerve. As it turned out, the moment found me. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary was in February. My mother had been talking about it since November, a dinner party at their house, just family and a few close friends, maybe 30 people. She'd asked me to help with the food because I am the one who knows how to cook things that don't come from a box, which has always been one of my assigned roles in the family. I had spent 2 Saturdays in January testing recipes. I had driven over the week before to help set up. I had contributed the money for the centerpiece flowers, $320 to the florist in their neighborhood because my mother loved peonies and the florist had them in February, which required a special order. The night was beautiful. Candles on every table, old photographs arranged on a sideboard, the particular warmth of a house full of people who have known each other for decades. My mother looked genuinely happy in a way that made me feel glad I had helped make it happen. Then came the part where she moved through the room greeting everyone, her sisters, her friends from church, the neighbors she's known since I was in elementary school. She reached Megan near the kitchen doorway and held her for a long time. The way you hold someone who has been through something, stroking her hair a little. Megan was wearing a new dress and looked fine. She looked better than fine. My mother hugged me for about 5 seconds when she passed me, touched my arm, said, "Have you tried the brie?" and moved on. Ethan's hand found the small of my back. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The dinner was wonderful. The food came out right. People laughed and told stories, and my father gave a toast about 35 years of marriage that was genuinely moving and made several people cry. Then my mother's sister stood and said some lovely things. Then a family friend. Then Megan stood up. She had not prepared anything, which you could tell immediately, but Megan has always spoken with the confidence of someone who believed that preparation is optional when you are charming enough. She talked about growing up in that house. She talked about how my mother drove her to every audition from age 9 to age 17, every single one, never complained, never looked at her watch. She talked about a time in high school when she was struggling and my mother had taken a day off work to spend it with her. Just the two of them, and how she had never forgotten it. People made soft sounds. Someone said, "Aw." Then she sat down and smiled at me. The small, uncomplicated smile of someone who has just done a nice thing and feels good about it. And I stood up. I hadn't planned to. I'd thought about it in the hypothetical way you think about something you keep telling yourself you're not going to do, the way you rehearse the words in the shower not because you're going to say them but because saying them somewhere, even to the shampoo bottles, releases a little pressure. But then I was standing and 30 people were looking at me and I saw Ethan set down his wine glass slowly. "I love my mother," I said. "I want to start there, because what I'm about to say is also true at the same time, and I think we don't always leave room for two things to be true at once." The room got quiet in the particular way. Rooms get quiet when they sense something real is about to happen. "Mom, you raised me to work hard," I said, "to be independent, to take care of myself and not make my problems into other people's problems. And I have done all of those things." I paused. I worked 2 jobs through my master's program. I paid for my wedding out of my own savings. I have never once called home in a crisis and asked for money. Another pause. "But for the last 3 years, I have been quietly sending money to you and Dad. $200 here, $300 there, $800 in June of last year when the water heater went and Megan needed a deposit at the same time. Just over $5,400 total in the last 12 months alone." My mother's face shifted. My father looked up from his plate. I kept going. "And last October, I was taken to the ER by ambulance. I called home from inside the ambulance. I told you I was scared, and I told you I was alone, and I told you I was alone, and I told you I didn't know what was wrong yet. And you told me Megan was having a hard time because an audition had fallen through." 30 people, not a sound. "You got to the hospital 3 hours and 37 minutes after that call." My voice stayed level. I had not planned for it to stay level, but it did. "I'm not saying this to hurt you on your anniversary," I said. "I'm saying it because I have been trying for a long time to be useful enough that I stopped feeling like the one you didn't clear your schedule for. And I finally understood, lying in that hospital room, that no amount of usefulness was going to change the math." Megan said, from somewhere to my left, voice quiet and tight, "That's not fair." "No," I said, "it isn't. You're right." I looked at my mother. "I'm going to stop the transfers," I said. "I should have done it a long time ago. I kept not doing it because I didn't want to be the difficult one. But I've decided that I would rather be difficult than invisible." "I love you," I said. I mean that right now at the same time as everything else I just said. Then I sat down. The room held the silence for a moment that stretched long enough that I could hear the candle nearest to me flickering. Then my aunt, my mother's younger sister, lifted her glass and said softly, "Happy anniversary." And the table followed glass by glass, and the evening resumed the way evenings do because life has a strange and relentless insistence on continuing. My mother did not speak to me directly for 4 weeks. She communicated through my father, who called twice to tell me that my mother was hurt and that he hoped Ethan and I would reconsider, and once to tell me that families go through hard patches and that he hoped I understood that they had always done their best. I said I knew that. I said I believed he believed that. I said I was not reconsidering. Megan sent me a text that said, "Did you really have to do that to them?" No question mark, just those 9 words. I read it twice. I put my phone down. I made myself a cup of tea. I did not respond. In March, my father called on a Tuesday evening when Ethan was at a work dinner and I was on the couch with a book I hadn't been reading. He said he had been thinking about what I'd said. He said he understood that things hadn't always been equal. He said that was harder to hear than he'd expected it to be. Then he said, for a long moment, almost nothing. Just his breathing on the other end of the line. Then he said, "We didn't know about the baby. That night, we didn't know what we were making you go through alone." "I know you didn't," I said. I told him then about the pregnancy, about the hemorrhage, about lying in the exam bay listening to a heartbeat that might or might not still be there in the morning. He was quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Is she okay, your daughter?" "We don't know yet if it's a girl," I said. He made a sound I had not heard from him before. Something caught, something tired, something that had been waiting a long time to be let out. I stayed on the phone with him for 45 minutes. It was not a fixed conversation, it was not a repaired one. But it was, I think, an honest one, which is different and in some ways harder and also more useful than fixed. My mother started texting in April. Small things at first. A picture of the crabapple tree in their yard in bloom. A question about whether I'd read the novel her book club was doing. The recipe for her chicken pot pie because I had mentioned once, years ago, that I wished I had it written down. I answered all of them. I was not performing forgiveness. I was not pretending the other thing hadn't happened. But I was also not interested in maintaining a wall that cost me more to hold up than it cost them. That's the part they don't tell you about cutting people off or threatening to. Sometimes the wall is heavier than whatever was on the other side of it. What I noticed, though, starting somewhere in March and continuing into April, was the lightness. The specific lightness of a weight you didn't know you were carrying because you had been carrying it for so long it had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like just the shape of your body. One evening in late April, I came home to find Ethan cooking dinner, which he does sometimes when he has had a good day and wants to mark it somehow. There was music on. He had opened a bottle of wine. He looked up when I came in and said, "You look different." "Different how?" I said. He thought about it. "Lighter," he said. "Like you're not bracing for something." I stood in the doorway for a moment and thought about that. We ate dinner and talked for 2 hours about nothing with any urgency. A trip we were loosely planning, the ongoing saga of whether our neighbor was ever going to finish the fence he had started in September, whether moss green was really the right choice for the nursery or if we had been romanticizing it. It was the best evening I'd had in longer than I could measure. My mother and I had lunch together in May, a diner near her house that we used to go to when I was in high school, one of those places that has been there so long it has become a kind of shorthand for the city itself. She was already sitting when I arrived, both hands around her coffee cup, looking out the window at the parking lot. She looked smaller than I thought of her. She looked like a person, which I know sounds like a strange thing to say, but what I mean is that she looked like someone who had also been carrying something and who was also tired. "I didn't know," she said, before I had even fully sat down, "about how much it had added up to. I want you to know that." "I know," I said. She looked at me. "I know that's almost worse." It is, I said. A little. She started to say something else and stopped. Then she said, that night in October, I've thought about it. Good, I said, not harshly, just honestly. She looked out the window again, then back at me. You were alone in there, she said. Yes, I said. She pressed her lips together. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything else for a moment. She didn't have to. We stayed until the diner got busy with the lunch crowd and a waitress asked, not unkindly, if we were still working on our coffee. We ordered more. We talked about the baby, real details this time, the OB and the due date, and the fact that we still hadn't decided between moss green and soft gray, and then my mother thought, diplomatically, that we might want to consider a warm white and start from there. She asked about Ethan. I told her about the drainage spreadsheets, the way he narrates them to me sometimes like sports commentary when he's tired, and she laughed in the way she laughs when something catches her genuinely, the full-face version. It was not fixed, I want to say that clearly. Things that take years to build in the wrong direction don't get fixed over coffee and a shared order of toast. But it was a beginning, and not a surface one. The kind that starts from the ground up instead of papering over what's been there. I drove home with the window down and my hand out in the air, feeling the difference between April warmth and the cold that had been sitting on everything all winter. I thought about October, the ambulance and the streetlights and the quiet, careful way the paramedic had handled my phone, the curtain in the exam bay, Adrian's warm blanket, Ethan's voice on the phone from somewhere on I-71, steady and frightened and coming. I thought about what it means to show up, not the performance of it, not the arrival 3.5 hours after the phone call, the rushed entrance, the touched face, the actual thing, the cleared schedule, the cop flight, the canvas bag with the phone charger and the warm blanket and no explanation needed. I have a small scar on the inside of my left wrist from an IV line that blew during that first night at the hospital. The nurse apologized twice. I told her it was fine. Some days I don't notice it. Some days I catch it in a certain light and I think about that night and I don't feel what I expected to feel. Not grief exactly, and not anger either. Something closer to clarity. The kind you can only get from going all the way through something instead of around it. My daughter was born in July, 8 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair that the nurses kept commenting on. Ethan cried in the particular silent way he cries, which I had only seen twice before and which I hope I see many more times because it means something has reached him all the way down. My parents were in the waiting room. They had arrived 2 hours before she was born and they had waited, and when the nurse brought her out, my mother held her like she was something she didn't want to put down, which she was, which she is. My father stood beside me and looked at his granddaughter and didn't say much of anything. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, just for a moment, and squeezed once. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't in speech. It was just a hand on his shoulder, which is sometimes all there is, and sometimes, if you let it be, it's enough to build something on. There's a scar on the inside of my left wrist where an IV line blew during that first night at St. Catherine's. Small. Faded now. Most days I don't notice it, but some days I catch it in a certain light, and I think about the whole chain of it. Not just the hospital, not just the phone call from the ambulance, but everything that led to that night and everything that came after, and I understand something I couldn't have put into words when I was still in the middle of it. What I understand is this: the way things turn out is rarely an accident, not in the dramatic fade-spoken sense, just in the quieter sense that the choices people make repeated over time tend to produce exactly the results they deserve. I spent 3 years making myself useful, making myself smaller, absorbing things that weren't mine to absorb because I had been taught that showing up quietly was the right way to love people, and for a long time I told myself that was enough. That if I was responsible enough, consistent enough, good enough at not asking for anything, eventually the math would even out. It didn't. It couldn't. Because that's not how it works. The money I sent every month didn't buy me priority. It bought my family a comfortable story about the kind of daughter I was: reliable, capable, fine. And that story made it easier for them to believe, when the ambulance called, that I would be fine again. They had no reason to think otherwise. I had never given them one. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not their failure. Mine. Not the failure of being generous. I don't regret that exactly. But the failure of honesty. The failure of saying clearly out loud, this is what I need and I am allowed to need it. I had confused keeping the peace with doing the right thing, and those are not the same thing at all. And figuring that out, even late, even lying in an exam bay at 11 o'clock at night listening to a heartbeat that might not be there in the morning, that was, in the end, worth something. What Ethan showed me, just by being the kind of person who calls Adrian from his car on I-71 while he's scared and driving in the dark, is that showing up is a choice you either make or you don't. It doesn't require the right circumstances. It doesn't require it being convenient. It requires deciding that the person matters more than whatever else is happening that night. That's not a grand gesture. It's just a clear sense of what's true. And what I had to find in those weeks after the anniversary dinner, after the silence and the texts and my father's voice on the phone, finally admitting he hadn't known what he'd made me go through alone, was that same clarity in myself. Not as a weapon, not to win something, just to finally be honest about what was real, what I had given, what I had needed, what I was no longer willing to pretend didn't matter. My daughter was born in July, 8 pounds, 4 ounces. My father held her and didn't say much of anything, which for him is its own kind of language. My mother couldn't put her down. None of that erases October, but I have stopped needing it to. The scar on my wrist is small, and it is mine and I earned it. Some things cost more than they should. You pay anyway. And then, if you're paying attention, you stop paying the ones that were never yours to carry in the first place.